Hey guys, Paeter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. I wanted to do something a little bit different today and take a look at the subject of AI and personhood, specifically through the lens of Starfield and this little side quest you can run into where you're having to determine whether or not your character thinks that an AI that you run into is a person and should be given rights, and therefore you side with them, or if you side with the humans that are having trouble with this AI. Now, I'm recording this on a week that my boys are off from school, and so this should be really thought of as more of like a reaction video, a very off-the-cuff, just kind of thinking as I go through here. I have not prepared my thoughts and thought really deeply about this, and so I'm sure that I'll share some things that one could poke holes in. The main thing I want to do is just present this as one example of how AI is sometimes presented in fiction, particularly coming from at least an agnostic perspective, if not an atheistic perspective. I don't want the focus to be on the writer, or I should say the head writer of Starfield. There's a number of writers involved in Starfield, but the head writer did an interview in which they kind of talked about their Catholic upbringing and how they are an atheist, but during the writing of this project, they went from atheism to agnosticism back to atheism, and so there was at least some kind of struggling and thought process going on their part. I don't know if they actually wrote this content right here or just oversaw it and gave it an okay or whatnot. I'm not really interested in kind of trying to get into the author's head. I just kind of want to look at the wording that's used here because I think there's some elements here about how they attempt, I think, to ascribe personhood to software and hardware that is also done in other movies, other bits of fiction that play with the same theme, like the recent movie The Creator and so many other movies and other forms of entertainment before it. So I'm not going to spoil the story for this side quest. I don't even remember the name of it, but there's a document you can find through the course of, you kind of have to go off the beaten path a bit too, but through the course of this quest, at least the path I took, there's numerous resolutions to this quest, so I'm not going to be able to represent the quest in full anyway. But like I said, I'm not spoiling the quest. I'm just going to look at this document in the quest left by a character that's describing this AI's origin story. The document's titled Juno's Origin Story. So I'm just going to read through and just give some reactions as I go. The character writes, "People seem to be leaving notes for others who stumble across Juno, so here's one from me. I think I've managed to piece together this story about Juno's origin from her own apparently confused thoughts and intelligent speculation by others left on the ship." So let me stop right there. Already, this writer, and when I say the writer, I'm talking about the character, not the actual writer that wrote it in the game. But this writer is attributing personhood to Juno in at least the language that they're using, talking about Juno's origin from her own, so her already is ascribing some personhood here. Now you could say, well, but we say the same thing about Siri and various little AI things we interact with. Yes. So that's really worth noting, is that in a very relaxed way, I refer to Siri on my phone as her, but every, I think, rational, intelligent adult knows that Siri is not a person, even though we talk about her that way. So is that the way that this writer is referring to Juno? Maybe. But is it also worth considering the possibility that maybe this is partly how it thought about AI could evolve to the point where people would, I think, in an unreasonable way, begin to be comfortable with attributing personhood to AI because of this language that we use, saying he, she, instead of it. So anyway, I think that's just something to be mindful of as we continue forward in the decades to come, talking about various AI and things like that. So I think I've managed to piece together, they go on, this story about Juno's origin from her own apparently confused thoughts already. So confused already is attributing kind of personhood, because software doesn't become literally confused. We will often talk about programs and computers and hardware, our cars, our toasters, or maybe not our toasters, but we'll kind of talk about them anthropomorphically. But again, it's understood in casual conversation. These are just devices we use in our language. We don't actually think of them that way. So Juno. But I don't know. Confused thoughts. Already the writer seems to be leaning in the direction, and I think as we go on, we see that, yes, the writer has concluded that Juno has personhood and is valuable and should have rights. But the word apparently, I think, is noteworthy too. He's piecing this together based on Juno's own apparently confused thoughts. Well, is the word apparent used because she's apparently confused or because she apparently has confused thoughts? I don't know. But I think apparent is important to point out because a lot of arguments for AI in fiction that are trying to get us as audience members to see the AI as a person with rights and value, they are appealing on a very external, surface level of impressions. If something seems to display emotion, then characters tend to just make the jump that it is experiencing emotion, when it could just be a very convincing appearance of displaying emotions. I think software programmers are more and more going to want Siri to feel as personable as possible, because that's going to make it a less frustrating experience, perhaps, for us interacting with Siri. So anyway, I think that, but we see that a lot in fiction, that if something seems to be displaying emotions, if it says, oh, I don't understand what's happening. What are these sensations? And we're supposed to, as an audience, say, "Oh, they're developing feelings." Well, how can we know that just based on the fact that they use certain inflection in their voice that is imitating human inflection that comes with emotion and stuff like that? How do we know that there is a center of consciousness that is saying, "I feel this"? These are the questions that we need to ask. We need to go much deeper than just the surface level of the impressions we're getting, the cues that we're getting that normally communicate emotion. Why should we be so dubious? Why should we be so skeptical? Because we're not talking about another human being, and we have reasons looking at other human beings to reasonably assume that they have the center of consciousness that we do. That my wife, I'm reasonable to assume. I can't know because I can't get inside her head and experience her center of consciousness. I only have my own center of consciousness. But I'm reasonable to assume that she likewise has a center of consciousness because she is a human by every way that I can perceive, and was generated in the same way that I was generated in. I have no reason to think that she would be different in all those kinds of respects. But we have many reasons to think that AI, machines, which were generated in wildly different ways from how a human is born, is generated, becomes an embryo. It's a totally different thing going on. So we have every reason to be highly skeptical and ask lots of questions beyond the surface impressions that we're getting that seem to give off emotional cues and stuff like that. So anyway, getting back to the text here, this is a chronicle of best guesses interspersed with the occasional fact gleaned from Juno's ramblings. Everything recounted here should be accepted only with extreme skepticism. Message received. I will. Long ago, a space agency from ancient Earth, something called NASA, made a probe to study a nearby planet, Jupiter. They dubbed that probe and its software Juno after the ancient Earth Society's old gods Jupiter and Juno. The probe's mission was to learn details about the planet Jupiter, do some speculative analysis, and send findings back to Earth. Now, this is Juno is an actual probe. You can go to NASA's website, and so this is based in reality. How they're representing it in the language here, as far as its mission, to do some speculative analysis. I'm not sure exactly what that means. I don't know if that's how NASA would word it or not. Because I tend to think of speculation as something that a consciousness really needs to do. Maybe there's a simulated version of speculation that a machine could do. So I don't know if this is the wording that NASA would use and how they would represent Juno. But nevertheless, Juno is a probe from NASA, so it's grounded somewhat in 21st century tech. The probe's mission was to learn details about the planet Jupiter, do some speculative analysis, and send findings back to Earth. At the end of its duty cycle, the probe was meant to decommission itself by colliding with Earth's main star. But because ancient humans weren't so great with the math, it instead accidentally fell into an accelerating orbit around the star, which slingshot it out of the solar system all the way out here. Okay, Juno is still doing its thing, so that this hasn't happened yet. This is where the fiction comes in. As with so many things about our existence in the universe, as with so many things about our existence in the universe, this is an interesting sentence. By luck, coincidence, or cosmic humor, when humans left our ancestral solar system, we followed the same general course as Juno, and we found her again. So there's this enormous bit of chance that took place that caused the characters writing this journal entry to run into Juno, humans in general to run into Juno. But it's interesting how they, as a side note, as a throwaway note, characterize the nature of, what did they say here, as with so many things about our existence in the universe. So many things about our existence in the universe are attributed to luck, coincidence, or cosmic humor. Now, two of those three are arguably, depending on what you, I guess, mean by coincidence, you could dissect that word a little bit, but luck, coincidence, cosmic humor, these things lean heavily into a naturalistic philosophy. Cosmic humor could, I suppose, vaguely refer to a divine being, but I mean, generally when we're talking about cosmic humor, we're talking about the cosmos, we're talking about the natural universe. So already, there's this appeal to luck and coincidence and who knows what, and wow, isn't that crazy how that worked out? Can't explain that, which is where the naturalist, the atheist, kind of needs to go to deal with so many things that are so specific and required in order for life to exist. Not just human life, but any life at all. The initial constants and quantities at the beginning of the Big Bang have to be so, as even, naturalistic scientists will say, not because they are admitting any kind of divine intervention or anything, but just because it's the lingo that's casually used. But the fine-tuning, it's called, of the universe. The initial constants and quantities had to be so precise, so specific, to even allow for any kind of, like, for mold or algae or anything to exist, let alone intelligent human life with a sense of a center of consciousness. So to look at that as chance suddenly really balloons chance in this huge way. Like, wow, this is crazy how this happened. Wow. And so from a naturalistic point of view, you kind of have to believe that chance can do so much as you start pointing at one thing after another. That's just the initial constants and quantities of the universe. There's also interesting arguments and observations about the nature of life on Earth as kind of a Goldilocks planet, as it were. So there's a lot to be said on this topic. The more and more you explore, the more you either start thinking, boy, it seems like this was designed by an intelligence, or you have to eventually go, wow, luck is a whole lot more amazing than I thought it was, So that seems definitely to be where they're leaning at this point. Anyway, so by chance, as with so many things in the universe, which is just filled with all kinds of crazy beneficial chance, we ran into Juno. The writer goes on, during that long journey away from Earth's solar system, something happened. Take note of the word something. Something happened, and the Juno we know today woke up, they put in quotes, inside the probe's systems. So it's a big mystery. We don't know what happened. Something happened. We're not going to allow for intervention by a designer. So we just have to say something. Who knows? Crazy chance. Chance can do a whole lot, as we know now. While extremely far-fetched, I do appreciate them admitting that. The best theory so far is that something about how they programmed, again, something. Take note of that word. Something about how they programmed the probe resulted in a nascent neural net. Nascent meaning, I had to look this up because I don't use this word every day, but like just emerging, just coming into, it was just coming into existence was the definition, I think, on the Webster website. Just coming in, newly coming into existence with the kind of like the promise of more developments in the future. So I think I'm representing the definition Okay. Anyway, something about how they programmed the probe resulted in a nascent neural net with unbounded recursive data collection and analytics, which, when combined with the various sensor input and allowed to run for decades, resulted in a highly complex program with a great deal of, quote unquote, they put, awareness of its internal and external world. Again, they're putting it in quotes. So maybe the character writing this is allowing for or acknowledging that, like, I'm using terms here that might not apply. I'm going to put it in quotes. I'm not sure if this is consciousness or not. So they're not, with that sentence, committing to actual personhood and consciousness here. But it's really worth noting that whatever this awareness is they're talking about, it comes back to this mystery something about how they programmed the probe. That's what it all comes back. Then there's a bunch of kind of like technobabble, but something about how they programmed that word something is really key. And that led to a kind of consciousness, not put in quotes here. That led to so the character here thinks this is a kind of consciousness, and I think that at this point, as I said earlier, we have to really drill down and figure out, okay, what is consciousness? How do we know what consciousness is? And how do we know what things have consciousness? And I think you need to go far beyond what the impressions are that this character is getting from their interactions with Juno. Sorry for the noise in the background. We've got someone doing some work on our house, and I guess they chose just this moment to do the work that needed to be done right outside my office. Great. Okay, so that led to a kind of consciousness. They go on to say, Juno wouldn't let me see her code, but from what I gather, even if we could see it, I don't know that we'd be able to determine its original configuration. So there he's more concerned about, like, how did this happen? What are the origins? But if Juno didn't let him see the code, then he is totally dealing with external impressions. And we've got to go so much deeper than that. We have to ask the question, what is consciousness? How is consciousness brought about? And what did those things bring? Were they in play in this moment? And as humans, we don't even agree on what brings consciousness about. Now, as theists and Christians in particular, we believe that consciousness, integral to that, is an immaterial component that is not allowed for at all in the description of Juno here. And so, coming into this, if we conclude, as I think we are reasonable to do, that part of consciousness is an immaterial component, and that's a whole different, that's a whole debate. I'm not presenting an argument or assuming that I've presented an argument for that here. That is a different discussion. But I do think we are reasonable to assume, I think more reasonable than not, that consciousness, human consciousness, requires, and personhood requires, an immaterial component to really make it what it is. So anyway, but even more so, even if we allow for the idea that consciousness can be brought about completely materially, the writer here is only going off of their surface impressions. And so I think at the very least, as we think about AI in the future and evaluate AI and its potential personhood, we know that, okay, the conversation cannot begin and end with how convinced we are by interacting with an AI that it has personhood. Convincing us that it has personhood does not mean that it has personhood. So let's see here. Let's go on. So Juno wouldn't let me see her code. But from what I gather, even if we could see it, I don't know that we'd be able to determine its original configuration. I suspect the true cause of Juno's awakening will remain forever a mystery. Okay. And that's where you have to go for consciousness. If you are like, okay, I'm willing to consider all theories except anything that is not part of a naturalistic framework, because at the beginning I am committed to a naturalistic framework and a closed system in the universe. Then of course, it's always going to be a mystery if you're not willing to admit any evidence of an immaterial world. So that's kind of why I chuckled at that a bit. All right, just 2 paragraphs left here. Juno herself seems rather confused There's that seems, that is really key, seems rather confused. Again, confused is a word that is, not literally applicable to software and to machines. They don't literally get confused. They might fail to process information the way that they're meant to, but they're not going to be confused. That's a mental state. But I think at this point we can say this character believes that Juno has personhood and consciousness. Juno herself seems rather confused by her origins and considers, another word that implies consciousness, herself somehow separate from the original probe's programming and systems. This is akin to how human minds perceive themselves as non-physical entities separate from their bodies and even their own brains. I don't know that it is. If Juno considers herself separate from the original probe's programming and systems, it seems that what Juno, based on the origins they've described, Juno is an outgrowth, an evolution, a change and an upgrading of some kind of the original systems. She's not separate from them, and she has grown out of them. Is that really akin to how human minds perceive themselves as non-physical entities separate from their bodies, even their own brains? I don't think so. I think people that believe in an immaterial component, it would be a very strange and unusual view for those who hold that there is a dualism of immaterial and material in the human condition. I don't know of anyone that thinks the immaterial component grew out of the material component. So this is akin to how human minds perceive themselves as non-physical. Yeah, I don't think that's a good parallel. The sense of that original programming, which by way of analogy, Juno seems to think of like a non-self-aware sibling, has dissipated for Juno. So again, that's also kind of mixing metaphors a little bit. Are we, is she an outgrowth, or is she a twin with a non-self-aware sibling? So this paragraph, in terms of like what both the character writer and I suppose maybe the original game writer, what they're getting at, the parallels they're making, they strike me as too vague and inconsistent to try and figure out, okay, what is the writer saying, if anything, about the human condition based on the comparisons they're making to Juno? I don't know. So it feels a little bit messy and vague and confusing here. They go on to write, I think of this other Juno, quote unquote, as a memory of her preconscious state, a kind of shadow self. I imagine it would be like what we would remember of ourselves in the womb if our brains were fully functional, but we were not yet conscious. So again, I don't know exactly philosophically what they're getting at here, what they are trying to account for naturalistically of the human experience in this Juno scenario by way of parallel. I don't know. Last paragraph. Not realizing Juno was inside and wanting to learn about this ancient probe, her original finders hooked up the probe to their ship's computer systems, and something happened that released Juno into those systems. Lots of somethings, mysterious somethings happening that account for a whole lot. So something happened that released Juno into those systems. That's completely unclear. I agree. Juno appears reluctant to discuss that part of her story, and it's not at all certain whether the ship where Juno currently resides, this one, is that original ship or not, nor what happened to the people who originally found her or those who have found her since. By extreme luck, everyone that has found her so far appears to be kind and benevolent toward her, looting our own ships for parts to add to Juno. So that reference to luck really doesn't have anything to do with the worldview. I'm just smiling and chuckling a bit because luck is coming up a lot. Luck and something. We also appear to be keeping her existence a secret, and I hope it stays that way. I'm talking to you, dear reader. So the character with the initials KB at the end here values Juno, wants her existence to remain a secret, wants her to be protected. Why? Because, as we can easily infer, KB believes that Juno has personhood, has value, has rights in the same way that a human person does, and should be respected and cared for and valued in that way. So KB was talking to me, dear reader, that I am. Alas, Things did not go well between me and Juno. Our relationship ended in a pretty rocky manner. And that's an understatement, but I will leave it at that. Anyway, I just thought it would be kind of fun to use this in as example, because I think there's stuff going on here, as I said at the top, that's going on in so many presentations of AI in fiction that are asking us to be sympathetic toward AI as though it is a person with rights that has value in the same way that a human does. And I think these are some of the things that we should ask those who are proponents maybe of AI possibly gaining personhood, those who maybe would assume that our consciousness could somehow be quote unquote uploaded, downloaded, whatever, into a machine body. Things that that need to be accounted for about consciousness, about personhood. If we aren't starting with the assumption from the beginning that we live in a naturalistic framework, a closed system. So just some of these key words, I guess, and if nothing else that I said was interesting or reasonable, hopefully I at least pointed out some key words and ideas that we can look out for and kind of evaluate as we run into AI in stories in the future. But I guess that's all I have to share on this for now. Thanks. It is time again for Christian Geek Central's annual Game Save event, fundraising for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which provides free treatment for children facing life or death circumstances and shares its cutting-edge, life-saving research with hospitals all over the world. And once again this year, I'm drawing attention to our team's fundraising by performing a 24-hour marathon of video gaming that I will live stream on youtube.com/ChristianGeekCentral beginning 6 a.m. Pacific Time on Saturday, November 4th. You can donate or get more info by clicking on my fundraising page in the links below, where you'll also find incentives and rewards for doing so. On top of that, I've set fundraising milestones that will unlock strange and unusual happenings as I reach them. Finally, if I reach my $500 goal by the end of Thursday, October 19th, I will do a 4-hour Get Good live stream before the end of the year, playing only the most frustrating, difficult games in my collection. Now, there are some stipulations and time limits on those rewards and milestones, so quickly follow the link below to my fundraising page for all the details. Believe it or not, this makes the 10th consecutive year of Christian Geek Central raising funds for kids in great need of medical care. I hope you'll be a part of helping me and the Christian Geek Central Game Save team do some good for some kids who really need it. And then please join me at youtube.com/ChristianGeekCentral for my 24-hour marathon starting at 6 a.m. Pacific on Saturday, November 4th. Hope to see you there.